Good morning, students. Here we are once again back to your literature paper, the prose section, lesson 6, An Angel in Disguise. You all may take your text, page number 77, your treasure trove, page number 77. Hope all of you are ready. Shall we go with it? Okay, children. So come along with me. We are going to do it together. So you will be reading along with me with your from your text, and I'll give you little explanations. And so put every effort to understand this beautiful short story written by T.S. Arthur. And so we begin. And An Angel in Disguise. It's a very simple story of a crippled girl named Maggie. The child being left motherless, she is being picked by a wheelwright. His name is Joe Thompson, and the little girl being able to transform Joe's wife Jane, who is a very short-tempered woman, very irritable lady. And here, T.S. Arthur, through this simple story, is able to make a critical commentary of the nature of humankind, the whole humanity. So we are mostly selfish and do things which serve our own interest. So he is helping us to look into our own selves to see where we are by the characters represented in the story. The story is set in a village where everyone knows each other and people pour in to help each other. And in the beginning of the story, we are told that people used to hate and despise Maggie's mother just because of her, what will I say, some kind of addictions. It is known to us that she was a drunkard, she was addicted to alcohol. And so people were hating Maggie's mother, but as soon as she dies, what happens? These villagers pour in to help the three motherless children. And what happens at the end of the story is that it is interestingly we see that Joe Thompson, who has taken the most pragmatic decision in picking up Maggie, as she has filled Thompson's household with joy and happiness. We come to know that Joe and Mrs. Joe were a childless couple, and Maggie became a kind of fortune for them. Okay, she became an angel in disguise in the family of Joe Thompson. And his selfless love for the little child is reciprocated by Maggie with such a sweetness that the Thompsons' household knew no bounds. They become very happy and joyful with the presence of little Maggie, the unfortunate child. The unfortunate become fortunate the moment Joe becomes selfless in his love towards the child. So it is the power of love which the author is trying to present in the story. So without going into much of explanation, we begin the lesson. And about the author, he is a 19th century American writer, and his stories were mainly meant for the children. His stories were written with compassion and sensitivity, articulate and spread values. Okay, he gave importance to give value based stories and ideas that were associated with the respectable middle class life in America. So let us go with the story. Are you all ready, children? Take page number 77. So here we go. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit and died in the presence of her frightened little children. And the story begins in such a way. Okay, all kinds of negative emotions are invoked in the heart of the reader. The first word itself is provoking a kind of negative sensation in the reader. What are the words? Idleness, vice, and temperance. Idleness, laziness. Vice, what is vice? The bad habits. And what do you mean by intemperance, children? It is lack of moderation. It can be drunkenness, addictions like the pornography or whatever be the addictions. Okay, these are called intemperance. Had done their miserable work, had contributed to this miserable situation, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. And what has brought idleness, vice, and intemperance has resulted in the death of this wretched woman. The mother is dead, lying cold and still in front of their wretched children. Wretched means miserable, worthless, very poor children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit. So she was completely drunk, and in that drunken fit, has fallen in front of the door and died. And the children are so frightened, so small children. In the coming lines, we'll come to know how old they are. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. The words both are contrary, death and the springtime of humanity. Death touches, and there the spring of humanity comes to an end. Spring of humanity means what? Spring of our common human. Spring is symbolic of physical well-being, warmth. It can also be, the word spring can be used for situation of where new projects, new ideas are developed. Okay, so spring is for all happiness, joy. Okay, now death touches the spring of our common humanity. This woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by every man, woman, and child in the village. Who is this woman? The woman who is dead and lying in front of her frightened children. She was despised, scoffed at. Despised means hated by all the people. Scoffed at, she was mocked at or ridiculed by everyone. And people were so angry and criticized just because she was a drunken woman. But now what happens? All on a sudden, what happens in the villages? As the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip in subdued tunes. Subdued tune means they were speaking below in a low voice. Pity took place of anger. Now, until now, they were so angry towards this lady, and pity. Now it has evoked pity in the heart of the villagers. And sorrow of denunciation. Denunciation means, what will I say? They had been accusing her. Now, instead of accusation, they are feeling sorry. They are feeling sorry about the situation under which the poor children are. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble down hut. So the house is like a broken hut in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. So she had kept that little small hovel, the hut. She has secured it to keep the children away from the summer heat and the winter cold. Some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body, and some with food for the half-starving children, 3 in number. So these villagers came, few of them brought some clothes to cover the dead body, and few brought some food for the starving children. So here we come to know they are 3 in number. Of these, John the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad, able to earn his living with any farmer. Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active girl, out of whom something clever might be made, if in good hands. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. Underline these children. Okay, what was the reason how Maggie became a handicapped child? 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine. So she has a spine injury, and that's why she is not able to stand erect. Okay, she is not able to leave her bed unless her mother lift her up. So we come to know from this paragraph, the family was a cursed family, and the mother was an alcoholic, and there was no father as the bread earner. Either we are not told either he was dead or had fled the home. We are not sure. The author does not say about the father. And we come to know there were three children: John, 12 years; Kate, between 10 and 11; and Maggie, the youngest girl. And we come to know how she had an accident and had broken her spine, and she is confined to her bed. And we also know the mother carried the burden of taking care of the family on her own shoulders. But the addiction made her quite unpopular in the village. That is why people were criticizing her, accusing her. And most inmates of the village kept their distance from this woman who is a drunkard. Now, what happens on a fateful day? She dies. Okay, the mother of the three tripled at the entrance of the door, and she was drunk then. Perhaps due to this, the fall turned out to be a fatal, and she died, leaving the three helpless children, including the bedridden Maggie. We see the calamity of the darkest proportions stared the three orphan children. Okay, now what happens? Now we see how the village folk come to rescue, but how they enter into some kind of discussion. The long term options are being made. It is all customary in the communities, isn't it? People from neighboring houses come into they came to the aid of the three children, but each one expresses their own views. Now let us see what happens with, okay, how these villagers express their views, how the common man is so selfish, okay, how they express themselves, how they wanted to get away from the burdens of the world. All these we come to know in the coming lines. So now we go to the third stanza. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. So everyone started discussing what to do with this orphan children. Neither mother nor father. Now who will take charge of this children? The dead mother would go underground and do forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. Now the mother has nothing to do. She will go to her grave. She is peaceful. She will take rest. But what is left for the children? What are we to do with the children? But the children must not be left to starve. We can't see them starving. After considering the matter and talking it over with his wife, Farmer John said that he would take John and do well by him now that his mother was out of the way. Now you see, okay, John, how old he is? He is 12, and everyone knows that he could be of help in the farming. So out of selfishness, it is not out of charity, Farmer John comes in front and he says, I'll take John and do well by him. He says, I will do good to him. But after all, what is his intention, children? His intention is that he will be getting a help without paying any penny, isn't it? He is getting somebody to help in his farming. And Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice for Katy, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. Now, another selfish woman, okay? It is not out of compassion, but their own personal interest, okay? They are thinking about their own benefit and says, Mrs. Ellis says, I'll take care of Katy. She says it is on account of charity, but what is her intention behind is that she would make a bound girl, okay? She will make her a slave girl who will be working for her. So we see both of them so very selfish for their own interest. They are taking these children to their houses. This is the world outside, children, okay? This is the world outside. We need to look into ourselves even, okay? Here Mr. Arthur, okay, the writer, want every reader to look into our own self. What is my attitude towards the suffering brethren? Am I moved with pity, sympathy and love and compassion to the other, or is it for my own selfish interest, selfish motives? Here both of them, Mrs. Ellis and Mr. Jones, did this charitable act in front of the others out of their own selfish interest. I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis, but as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from a sense of duty, expect to have trouble with the child, for she is an disciplined thing, used to having her own way. Now, what a selfish way. Okay, Mrs. Ellis is trying to justify her action by telling Katy is an undisciplined girl and I'm going to be trouble. But is what is within her everyone else know. She wanted to make her a bound girl, and she expressed that she is doing a charitable work by saying no one seems inclined to take her, nobody is willing to take her, and so I am. Justification of her action. I must act from a sense of duty. It's my sense of duty, my compassion, my charitable feeling, my pity towards the child, that I am taking Katy with me. Hope you understand her selfishness. What are her intentions behind? It is not because the others were not taking. She ceased. Actually, Mrs. Ellis took Kate very quickly and felt the young child was an adorable one. Okay, actually, within her, she knew that she is an adorable one. She felt Kate would be a nice fit for her family. She was offered to take Kate under her care. It was a spontaneous reaction. It was not out of sympathy at all. Now, what to do with the unfortunate, incapable child Maggie? She was a burden and good for nothing child. But no one said, I will take Maggie. Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. So everybody looked at her pitifully. Many sympathized with Maggie, but nobody wanted to take her as a burden. So the sympathy could work nothing. All sympathized with Maggie, but a few were ready to take her. After all, she was a dead weight who had to be cared for all her life with nothing to get in return. And no one wanted Maggie because they exchanged glances to see if anyone was coming forward, but none did. Maggie lay in her bed, staring vacantly into a dark, bottomless hole. So the child was frightened. Okay, the child was so frightened. She knew that she is going to be left alone. Mothers brought cast off garments and, removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in a clean attire. So some were sympathetic, so they brought some old clothes and changed her cloth, okay, and dressed her in clean attire, new clothes. Not new, but clean clothes. Maybe the old clothes of their children. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts. Okay, everyone felt sympathy and even knocked at them for entrance. Everybody got into the entrance to see what is happening with the child. But none opened to take her in who wanted a bedridden child. So nobody wanted to take this burden upon them. Take her to the poorhouse, said a rough man, of whom the question, what is to be done with Maggie, was asked. So one among the villager, who is a rough-hearted man, he said, take her to the poorhouse. What is to be done with Maggie? Nobody is going to be bothered with her. So he said, certainly no one is going to be bothered of this useless or the helpless an unfortunate child like Maggie. The poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and a helpless child, answered one. So someone said, it's not fit for, the poorhouse is not fit for Maggie. It is a sad place for a sick and helpless child. So somebody said, she should not be sent to the poorhouse. For your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking. So someone said, for your child or mine? Are we speaking about your child or mine? It is about a helpless child whom nobody is ready to take up. But for this brat it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than can be said of her past condition. So someone started justifying, telling the poorhouse is still better for this girl. Why? At least she will be given proper shelter, she will get sufficient food, and also she will be kept clean. Also, she will get timely medicine. So for this brat means mischievous child or unruly child, or for this spoiled child, it will be a blessed change. So he says the poorhouse will be a blessed change for Maggie. So it is better that we send her to the poor house. Now what happens here? There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. So many were not happy with the decision to send poor Maggie to the poor house. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. So the next day, they kept the burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel. Few of the neighbors gathered in that shed, the miserable hovel, the house, the hut of Maggie. But none followed dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. So this unhonored woman, the woman who was a despised woman, and that also to a pauper grave means extremely poor, a grave of a poor, extremely poor person. So nobody wanted to follow the cart of the dead body. Farmer John's, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away. So soon after the burial, what did Mr. Jones do? He took his share. What was that? He took John and he drove away his cart, satisfied that he had done his part. So he was justified by his own action. Okay, he has done his part for this poor, hapless children. Now, Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air. So, now Mrs. Ellis also wanted to do her part. So, she hurried to Kate and said, now bid your sister goodbye. Okay, bid farewell to your little sister. And drew the tearful children apart ere scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. Before the children kissing each other, she parted them, separated them, and she took Kate away from poor little Maggie. And now Maggie is left alone. Hastily others went out, so everyone else so hurried to go away. Go away. Nobody wanted to take the trouble of taking Maggie either to the poorhouse or to their care. So everyone hurried, moved back from the situation. This is what happens, isn't it? When everybody know there is some trouble, some difficulty to be taken, everybody will shake their hands and move away. So here also all the other villagers hastily, hurriedly went away, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from look. Some even did not want to look at the child until all had gone. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest. Now, who are left there? Mr. Joe Thompson and the blacksmith's wife. Now, he had no option, okay, Joe Thompson, because he is a compassionate man, okay, a big-hearted man, so he could not take a step further. So he looked at the blacksmith's wife, who was also hurrying to keep away from the troubled situation. So he called blacksmith's wife and said, "It's cruel thing to leave her so. Then take her to the poorhouse. She will have to go there." So blacksmith smiled without having any pity and sympathy. She says, "You take her to the poorhouse. She will have to go there. No one else is going to help the child, so she will have to go to the poorhouse," answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away, okay, rising quickly away and leaving Joe behind. So she did not want to do anything more. So she rushed. She sped away from the situation. For a little while, the man stood with a puzzled air. So Joe Thompson was so very disturbed. So he was in confusion. He was disturbed. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. So he went into the hut of poor Maggie once again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. The poor child was so frightened. She knew her mother is no more. Her brother and sister are taken by someone, and she is left alone in that dark, deadly situation. In that small hut, the poor little child is sitting all alone, waiting for someone to have pity on her. Now, the most striking situation happens. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," she cried out, catching her suspended breath, "don't leave me here all alone." So the poor child, she was breathless. She cried out to Mr. Thompson, "Please don't leave me alone." Suspended breath means she was interrupted in her breath, okay? She delayed in her breath. She could not breathe even well when she called out Mr. Thompson. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. Now see the description of Mr. Joe Thompson. So when you look at him, exterior, okay, what was the outward show of Mr. Thompson? He is a very rough person. So the outward look, the appearance is very rough. But it is said the wheelwright, okay, Joe Thompson is a wheelwright. What is wheelwright? One who builds, a person who builds and repair the wheel. So he had a soft heart, and it was very tender in some places. So he used to become so tender hearted, so compassionate, so merciful in some places. Now we will come to know the reason why he is so very tender, why he is so compassionate, why he feels so very sensitive when it comes with the children. Okay. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. So the village children used to gather to him since he is a wheelwright, okay, one who builds the wheel. He has got the tools with which the children can get some kind of toys. So children used to ask him to make sleds and wagons for their play, the little toys, and without taking much payment for that. Okay, they used to have sixpences means half of a shilling. It's a small British coin. Okay, so children may not have a sufficient money to pay to him, but he used to make wagons and sleds for the children without taking money from the children. He used to repair their wagons. "No, dear," he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. "You shall not be left here alone." What a consolation! What a consolation! Joe Thompson says, "You shall not be left here alone." So he went close to the child and said, "I shall not leave you alone." Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman. Okay? With a rough exterior but with a heart almost like that of a woman. Many villages were there around. None of them felt compassion or mercy towards this hopeless child. But here a man, Joe Thompson, rough in exterior, comes to help the poor child. Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman in the clean bedclothes which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in his strong arms, bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. At last, he covered the little girl in a bedsheet and took her to his house. So we stop here, children. We shall continue the chapter tomorrow. So up to here, read it at least twice and try to understand. Okay, all the best.